At 27,000 feet, the air thins into glass. Control inputs stop feeling like motions and start feeling like suggestions, and every small mistake takes a long, cold second to correct. A veteran German pilot, call him what he was to his comrades, calm, disciplined, confident, tilts the nose of his single-engine fighter down into a perfect, shallow dive. He has done this hundreds of times. The math is as familiar as the lines on his palm. Altitude is stored energy becomes speed, speed buys choice. Below, the American formation trails long white brushstrokes across the big sky. The bombers plod. The escorts, four strange, twin-tailed silhouettes, hold a lower shelf of air like they own it. Good. A heavy twin is a gift when you're up sun and 3,000 feet above. That is what the manuals say. That is what the last 4 years say. He commits. Nose down. Throttle forward. The airframe hums as it fattens with speed. At this height, you don't yank, you breathe on the stick. The Pipper slides toward the lead American. And then the American does something that should not happen. It climbs. Not a tentative, save a little speed, drift into the vertical. A decisive pitch-up that feels almost rude, as if some hidden cable has pulled the typewriter clean nose directly toward the zenith. In the German's gun sight, the closure rate collapses. In 10 heartbeats, the 3,000 feet he owned is gone. In 20, the American is level with him. In 40, it's above, rolling lazily inverted, converting climb into gravity-paid speed and pointing that concentrated nose battery down the slope of sky he thought was his. The German steadies, corrects, and thinks the thought every experienced pilot dreads: the rules just moved. If your camera could live inside that moment, you would catch tiny details you've never noticed in photos. The twin booms are not decoration, they are structure. The pilot's canopy sits in a short central pod, not a long fuselage. When the American rolls out overhead, you see the logic of the thing. Engines out in the booms, heat and hazard carried away, the nose a clean, undisturbed gun platform, a tail fork that seems odd until you watch how the airplane pivots on the vertical like a compass needle. Up here, where thin air narrows every margin, everything is supposed to get worse. Engines breathe less. Climb rate tapers off. You make choices in slow motion and then wait to see if you guess correctly. That is the world the German knows. Except the Lightning, because that's the airplane's name and it fits, behaves as if the air were thicker, the lungs bigger, the climb stronger. It says, I will take the high ground right now, and then it does. We could freeze frame on the glove hands and the tachometer needles, but the more honest way to tell this story is to admit how the change felt. To those who had trained for years on the classic energy fight, get high, dive, strike, extend, reset, the Lightning made the sky feel tilted. It denied a habit, not just a tactic. If you learned that heavy twins give away the vertical by the time they reach bomber altitude, you expected them to dive off the problem and hope to regroup at a friendlier height. Instead, this twin asked for more sky and took it. That one unexpected climb is our doorway. Walk through it and you step into a different set of priorities, born far from any European airfield. It begins in a briefing room where American planners write a requirement that seems to contradict itself in every line. Fly high with the bombers, guard them all the way in and all the way home, carry serious firepower, survive long sorties at winter altitudes, and if an enemy arrives above, meet him there. The short-range knife fight over a local front is not the problem. The problem is the continent itself, the distance to the factories, the altitude where contrails live, the time spent exposed. So we will rewind, carefully and with purpose, into the decisions that made one airplane play a different game. We'll do it without drowning in numbers, but we won't wish away the physics either, because this is a story about physics used like strategy. We'll follow a few pilots. Composite voices built from reports and habits that repeat across squadrons. We'll visit the shop floor where a young engineer with the soft nickname Kelly looks at an impossible shopping list and declines to negotiate with it. And we'll come back to that German dive, again and again, to watch how the same move, one pilot diving, one pilot climbing, feels completely different once you understand why the Lightning kept its breath high where others ran out. For now, sit with the moment. The German's attack run is spent. His speed is real but pointed nowhere useful. The vertical is no longer his. The American doesn't yank for a flat turn. He doesn't try to match rates. He arcs, clean and efficient, back toward the sun side, because this is not about showy angles. It is about staying inside a tidy loop of energy where you choose when and where to meet. That is the first lesson the Lightning teaches the people who fought it. If you expect the world to tilt the way it used to, You will find yourself surprised, and then surprised is what gets you busy recovering instead of deciding. If you want to know how such confidence was built into metal, you have to leave the sound of guns and the white lines of contrails for a workshop where pencil marks and wind tunnel smoke decide what will be possible a few years later. You have to ask why someone would put engines in the wrong place on purpose. You have to ask why anyone thought two of everything could ever be lighter on its feet than one. And you have to ask which problem the airplane was actually designed to solve, because design that starts with the real problem often looks strange to those solving a different one. That is where we are going next. The sky is the stage, but the script was written on drafting tables that refused to accept a contradiction as final. The lightning's climb, this one, right here, did not come out of nowhere. It came out of a decision to treat farther, higher, longer, stronger not as a contradiction but as an invitation. The requirement arrived on paper, flat and harmless. Reach high air fast, run far without gas-starved nerves, carry a punch worth bringing, and be steady enough to keep company with bombers for hours. On most desks, it looked like a dare you politely ignore. At the Lockheed plant in Burbank, it looked like a set of constraints to be rearranged until they agreed with each other. Clarence Kelly Johnson, 30-something, unpretentious, and allergic to wasted motion, did not take the usual path of asking what could be trimmed from the wish list. He asked a more subversive question. If we accept every line item as non-negotiable, what shape does the answer have to be? The answer that met him looked nothing like the svelte, single-spine fighters most pilots expected. The answer had two engines, separated from the pilot and the gun pack. The answer had twin tails on a spread bar. The answer was not pretty by the style book. It was correct by the math. Start with power. One engine can be formidable. Two reliable engines, each with its own turbocharger breathing thin air like sea level, do something different. They keep climb alive where the sky gets stingy. Turbocharging is a simple idea that is hard to do well. Let exhaust spin a compressor that shoves more oxygen into the cylinders. Simple explains why everyone tried it. Hard explains why so few made it work cleanly at fighter weight. General Electric, working with the Air Service and a handful of patient design teams, did the unglamorous work. Metals that stand heat, controls that don't hunt, plumbing that doesn't cook everything around it, and gave the Lightning two lungs that didn't gasp at 30,000 feet. That is the seed of the climb you saw a moment ago. Move to the guns. Most single-engine fighters mount machine guns in the wings. At a chosen distance, convergence, the streams cross. Before and after that distance, patterns spread and energy drops. The Lightning's nose is empty of engine and full of purpose. For heavy machine guns and a cannon line up in a tight bundle, sighted straight ahead.
No convergence.
No guessing which stream will be worth more at which range. If you point well, everything you fire stacks on the same point of sky. In a universe where fights often collapse into a few seconds of acceptable firing geometry, that sort of simplicity becomes kindness. Then there is survivability. Here again, two engines are not fashion, they are insurance. Lose one over water, mountains, or a continent of unfriendly airfields, and you still have the other. The layout pushes heat and risk into the booms and away from the pilot's heart. The central pod can devote volume to fuel, pilot protection, and systems packed without fighting the engine for space. In a day when range is not an option but the whole point, having room for fuel without distorting everything else is not luxury. It is the reason the airplane exists. But every gift comes with chores. Two engines mean two sets of gauges, two sets of temperatures to manage, two propellers to harmonize, two turbo systems to treat kindly. Maintenance crews would need to learn a new grammar of plumbing. Pilots would need to understand that this machine would forgive very little in a vertical dive once the air piled up around a wing built for speed. Compressibility, the quiet, sneaky enemy of fast shapes, showed up in flight test and claimed brave lives until a simple, clever tool joined the airplane. Small dive recovery flaps that changed how air flowed around the wing at speed, handing back enough elevator authority to pull out of dives with room to spare. This is how innovation actually moves. A big leap framed by 100 small guardrails. The first prototype flew in a young year and did something cheeky almost immediately. A long, fast cross-country that proved the shape's promise before a forced landing turned headlines into size. Even that incident taught something important, that the airframe slid through the air on very little fuel when handled patiently, that energy stored in altitude and low drag could buy long minutes of options. The Air Corps kept the faith and ordered test batches. Flight crews learned the startup dance. The turbo discipline, the art of trimming out a twin so it flew like one thought in a single piece of sky. All of this story, so far, lives on the ramp, in hangars, in test reports, in grease pencil on clear plastic. But design does not prove itself until it meets the problem it was built for. In the Pacific, an early taste of the Lightning's personality appeared. Long-legged patrols, quiet climbs above ocean weather, dives that began far away and ended with a single sustained burst into a narrow target. There, the airplane's nose guns and endurance felt like custom tools. Yet the real trial would always be Europe, because Europe asked the awkward question no one else had to ask. Can you sit beside lumbering friends for hours, at altitudes that make other engines sulk, and still have enough breath left to do something decisive when someone arrives above you? That is why the Lightning crossed the Atlantic on ships and followed bomber groups into the grey weather of northwest Europe. That is why ground crews in England learned a new ritual of warmers and shielding for valves and pipes that did not love frozen air. That is why pilots practiced a new sequence of actions when the air thickened in a dive. Flaps out, nose eased, recovery planned 1,000 feet earlier than they'd liked. And that is why the strange twin-tail shape began to appear in contrail photographs, snugged close to heavy formations at heights where everything else faltered. If you wanted to understand how it felt to fly next to those bombers, imagine hours of vibration that numbs your thighs, a canopy rim glazed with frost, and the constant, tidy recitation of checks. Fuel to the right tanks, temps in the lines, boost reading steady but not lazy. You watch the top of the sky because that is where the trouble begins. You keep your mind ahead of your hands because the airplane likes you best when you do not ask it to recover something you could have prevented. And when the moment comes, specks above, a glint that crosses the sun, you push the throttles forward and discover whether the things the factory promised are true in the winter air over a continent. What changed the European air war was not a single dogfight, or even a day's worth of them. It was the way those moments added up. Attackers who used to count on the top step losing that margin, escorts who used to turn back at the border staying on, massed formations that used to be naked at the loneliest point of the mission now having company. The Lightning did not erase risk. Nothing could. It rearranged where risk lived, and that mattered. German units that had written timing tables around escorts leave here found their tables wrong. Tactics that assumed heavy twins will not me us up high suddenly required amendments. The most revealing truth about the airplane is this. What looked like odd choices on a blueprint were, in the sky, a string of very plain advantages. A nose battery that made brief firing windows count. Engines that did not act their altitude. Fuel carried where the rest of the design could breathe around it. And a wing that, when treated with respect, turned long climbs into easy resets. None of this was magic. It was humility before the mission, turned into metal. We could stop in this workshop a little longer. There are more choices to admire, but the story is impatient to return to the sky. Because as soon as those choices met the German habit of get high, dive, strike, extend, the habit cracked. In the next block, we will stand with both sets of pilots on a day when two large raids crossed Europe and see how expectations met an airplane that had been designed, from the first line on the first page, to ignore them. Dawn over the North Sea looks gentle from the ground and tired from the air. The first bomber boxes climb through layered haze until the world becomes a pale corridor of sun and steam. Behind them, tucked where contrails intersect, the new twins settle in. Lightnings with winter covers still on some turbo lines, pilots checking boost needles like metronomes. This is not glamour. It is management, of heat, of fuel, of attention. The plan on paper is ambitious. 2 huge groups, 2 targets that keep factories turning, timing coordinated so defenders must spread thin. On the radio, the code words are crisp, but inside each cockpit the reality is simpler. Hold position, watch the high arcs where dots sharpen into aircraft, and decide early so you never have to react late. Across the frontier, the response is as practiced as a drill. Controllers string pearls of intercepts along the route. Veteran units climb first, then weave into sun lines. The best shots, those who can make a firing opportunity appear where none should have, aim for the long dives that begin with patience and end with a single burst into a bomber's blind spot. Others take the edge, ready to chase escorts away. Among them are pilots like the one we met, men who know the comfort of stored altitude and the reassuring predictability of light single-engine fighters. They meet over the river bends and smoke stacks. The first attacks arrive at the bombers. Fast passes, disciplined brakes, no loitering. Tracers arc gunners count seconds between bursts to cool the barrels, pilots keep formations tight, and the escorts do what they are here to do, cut stairways into the sky where none existed a month ago. From a Lightning seat, everything you've been trained to do compresses into a routine that looks calm to an observer and feels like a sprint to a participant. You never point your nose where your mind isn't already parked. When a shape appears above at the wrong angle, sun behind it, closure high. You don't flat turn and plead your case to drag and wing loading. You advance both throttles as if drawing a bow, the turbo controls riding just below the red, and you ease the nose until the horizon drops out of the canopy. Your airplane answers like a strong swimmer, finding more stroke where thinner water hides. The climb is not dramatic inside. It is steady, and steadiness is what matters because steadiness is time converted into advantage. Down below, a German attack run that should have been simple becomes homework. By the time the dive reaches its sweet spot, the target is no longer where it belongs. The escort has gone through the bracket instead of under it, and the old, efficient plan, attack, extend, recreate high ground, turns into the least efficient plan of all. Trade speed for a climb you cannot win, then re-attack with less room than before. The smart move is not to press. The smart move is to make a disciplined dive for a new setup and try again somewhere else. But the sky is busy now, and somewhere else is getting crowded with other pilots making the same calculation. This is what doctrine looks like when it meets a machine from a different set of assumptions. The Lightning refuses to acknowledge the altitude penalty that has governed 4 hard years. It is not that it climbs forever. No airplane does. It is that it holds climb when others have surrendered it, and that one habit difference accumulates across a mission. In place after place, attackers who expected to buy time with a single, clean pass must spend more fuel and attention to earn position again. That cost does not show up in photographs. It shows up later, when someone calls bingo earlier than scheduled, or when ammunition counts on landing are lower than the debrief standard. The bomber crews notice something subtler. In the worst moments of past raids, midday over the deepest point, escorts gone, there was a slot of sky that felt empty. Today, that slot isn't empty. A twin tail leans into the sun over the right wing. Another sits 3 ship lengths ahead and above. When the next attack builds, the escort doesn't sprint in from far away. It is already there, trimming almost lazily for a climb that meets the dive halfway. Morale is a geometry too. When protection remains visible during the longest 20 minutes, crews fly tighter, gunnery steadies, and the formation behaves like an organism instead of a herd. None of this makes the opposition less skilled. Their pilots still time dives beautifully. Their engines still sound healthy at the start of a pass. The difference is where the end of that pass leaves them. A single-engine fighter that expected to exit with a cushion of altitude discovers it is now close to parity, or even below, relative to an escort that has kept its breath. That moment, when an attacker looks up and sees an equal or higher threat, is more than tactical, it is psychological. The next decision leans conservative, the next turn is wider than it might have been, and caution, multiplied across squadrons, becomes a pattern. We can stand with one German pilot who keeps a cool head amid surprise. He dives cleanly, brakes when his sight picture is honest, and then refuses the urge to yank up into a slow climb. Instead, he trades his speed for a long, shallow exit, keeping his engine in the band where it is still strong. He watches the twin tails rise, decides not to race vertical where he'll lose by design, and slides across the sun instead, looking for a seam. This is adaptation in real time. He knows now that the escorts can meet him up here. He chooses terrain, the sun line and the edge of the raid, where numbers and angles work in his favor. He survives, and so do his habits, but the airfight he joined at dawn is not the one he trained for. By late day the raid unwinds, as all raids do. What happens in the separate return corridors says as much as the fight. Fewer bombers limping alone, more coming home with paint scorched and yet unbroken. In the maintenance bays, ground crews note that the twins used more fuel than hoped and less ammunition than feared. Pilots talk about compressibility in the cold air. Once more, the dive flaps earn their keep, and about 1 or 2 moments when a climb felt like standing on an escalator that never slowed. No single engagement proves a thesis. A season does. Over weeks, debrief notes shift tone. Escorts present at deepest point. Enemy passes cautious. Climbs by P-38 effective above 25. This is how strategy changes, not with a trumpet, but with logbooks and adjustments. The next set of defensive orders on the other side mention altitude bands to avoid when the twins are near, new approaches that emphasize lateral attacks and dives from fresh quadrants. Nothing stays still in war, least of all ideas. On the Lightning side, lessons gel too. Do not squander your climb on flat turns that feed the other pilot's plan. Keep the vertical tool sharp by managing temperature and boost 5 minutes before you need it. Teach wingmen to watch each other's flanks in the climb. The moment you commit upward is also the moment you can be blindsided. And always, Always recover from the dive like you practiced. Early, smooth, with flap set before speed heaps up on the wing. By the time evening light turns the coastline into a ribbon, crews are already disassembling the day into meaning. What the twins have bought is not invulnerability. That word belongs in stories, not briefings, but continuity. The mission plan no longer has a built-in lonely hour. The defenders no longer own the top by default. The map of where risk lives has been redrawn, and both sides feel it in their bones, even if the words will take longer to catch up. If you peel back the lightning's paint and look at the choices, you can see why that continuity became possible. Each decision is plain enough on its own. Together, they form a chain where no single link snaps under altitude stress. Begin with the breath. A piston engine is a lung with pistons. Thin air starves it. Solutions fight that starvation. A supercharger bolted to the engine is a reliable helper, but it asks the engine to spend some of its own strength to spin the compressor. That bargain works beautifully down low and well enough up to a point, then falls off. A turbocharger, spun by waste exhaust, is different. It is a quiet gift of energy you are going to throw away. The trouble is heat, bearings that dislike furnace air, housings that must not crack, controls that must not overshoot. General Electric's hardware solved these practical pains with robust materials and governors that didn't hunt. Lockheed then placed the hardware where heat could be managed, in the booms, aft of the engines, with long runs that let temperature relax before it reached anything fragile. This is not a glamorous story, but it is the difference between a diagram and a climb that repeats all winter. Move to where the pilot lives. In a single-spine fighter, the engine sits just ahead, the guns sit in the wings, the fuel must fit in awkward cavities. In the Lightning, the pod can be simple. The pilot gets clean sight lines. The guns sit on center, so aim is aim, not mathematics of convergence. Fuel fills tanks that are not chewing into other system space, and the weight sits where balance stays happy as fuel burns away. All of this sounds tidy because it is, and tidiness in engineering often becomes calmness in combat. Consider the wing and the dive. Early Lightnings taught a harsh lesson. Fast shapes can become unresponsive when air begins to approach the transonic neighborhood, even when the rest of the airplane thinks there's speed to spare. Control forces build, the tail may lose influence, and the pilot's best intentions arrive late. The fix, a small set of surfaces that change how air flows under the wing at high speed, returned elevator authority where it mattered. The addition took almost no weight, added no drama to normal flight, and did exactly one thing brilliantly. You can love a machine that solves one problem without creating three. Now put these pieces into training. The airplane will do the work if the pilot does the homework. That meant new checklists, turbo warm-up dance, prop synchronization by ear and needle, power settings that preserved dry powder in the manifold for moments that demanded it. It meant systems awareness drilled into muscle memory, catching a creeping temperature before it becomes an excuse to abandon altitude, recognizing the early signs of compressibility and rolling shallow to plant the dive flaps before the stick grows heavy. It meant teaching restraint to a generation that rightly loved to yank and bank, because the Lightning rewarded patience in the vertical far more than theatrics in the horizontal. Maintenance mirrored that discipline. Crew chiefs became part meteorologist, part machinist. In cold snaps, canvas shrouds, and ground heaters kept oil and turbo lines cooperative. Mechanics learned to route, clamp, and safety wire twin systems so vibration did not turn a long mission into a short one. They discovered which seals disliked which fuels, which sensors read honestly after a long winter climb, and which liked a gentle tap to wake up. The airplane gave back what it received. Thorough work produced reliability that looked like luck to outsiders and felt like trust to the pilots. Even trust needs tactics. The best Lightning flights use the vertical like a spring, never compressing it fully, always keeping a little travel in reserve. They rarely chase tight, flat turns unless nothing else would do. Against single-engine opponents that could still turn tighter at certain speeds and altitudes, they made a deliberate choice. Do not play that game. Make the first attack count, zoom, reposition, and re-enter from a place where the twins' breathing advantage matters most. Wingmen learned a layered climb, one taking the first intercept, the other half a step behind and above, not stacked directly where a single mistake would trap both. The adversary, to its credit, adapted in return. Intercepts arrive from stranger angles, with short, hard dives aimed at escorts rather than bombers, hoping to force flat responses and erode the twins' energy cushion. Some units shifted to lateral slashing attacks at the outer edges of formations to avoid that startling head-on nose battery. Others focused on timing, catch the bomber stream as escorts swap drop tanks, grab moments when the twins' fuel planning narrowed their options. The sky became a dynamic chessboard instead of a parade of doctrine, and that made both sides sharper. Among Lightning crews, stories circulated that were not about scoreboards but about margins saved. A pilot who lost one engine over the grey chop still climbed, slowly but surely, out of flak height and made the coast at dusk. Another who entered a winter dive too steep felt the stick grow quiet, then felt the small thump of the dive flaps deploying and the relief of a nose that obeyed again with room to spare. A third who absorbed damage to one boom learned that the structure carried loads with unexpected grace, limping home with a tail that looked fragile and behaved solid. These stories were not legends. They were memos to the squadron. The airplane will look after you if you look after it. There were honest critiques too. The cockpit workload could be high when the sky grew crowded. 2 engines, 2 turbos, radios, sighting, and formation management. New pilots sometimes chased needles instead of flying the picture. In deep cold, cranky components could make startup an hour-long exercise in patience. And early variants suffered in dives before fixes arrived. None of these observations contradict the climb you watched in the first scene. They explain the price of owning such a climb at 30,000 feet. Complex tools do not punish competence. They reward it. By late winter, a new normal settled in. Bomber crews planned with escorts at the far end instead of escorts until the border. Controllers on the other side recalibrated their time to intercept when twins were reported. Old tables underpredicted altitude loss and overpredicted the chances of clean exits. And pilots on both teams adjusted their inner monologues. If you flew Lightning, you stopped being surprised when a climb at altitude felt like a strong stair rather than a ladder with missing rungs. If you flew against it, you stopped assuming gravity and thin air would do your work for you. It is tempting to say the airplane changed the rules. The rules did not change, the inputs did. 2 good lungs instead of 1 at altitude. A wing that kept its manners in dives once modified. Guns that made brief windows matter. Systems and training that treated altitude not as an enemy but as an environment. That is how advantage really works. A handful of sensible decisions, aligned with a mission, repeated until the other side stops believing you will run out of breath when they think you should. In the next block, we will ride with 2 pilots, one in a Lightning, one in a single-engine interceptor, through 6 minutes stamped into memory for both, and will follow those 6 minutes into the briefing rooms where each side tried to explain what just happened in terms that their comrades could use tomorrow. 6 minutes. That's what both of them remember when they tell the story later. The Lightning pilot because it felt like a sprint that never let up, the interceptor pilot because it felt like a chess match that kept changing boards. Minute 1 begins with geometry. The Lightning is offset high right of the lead bomber box, throttle set in the comfort band where temps stay honest and the turbos hum. The pilot, call him Carter, checks the sun line, trims a half-notch nose up, and nudges formation spacing so his wingman sits slightly aft and higher, a built-in insurance policy. Across the sky, an interceptor, call him Foggle, rolls from a weave into a tidy dive, sight pointed not at a bomber but at the escort that will ruin the next pass if left alone. He carries good speed, a measured descent, and the confidence that has come from dozens of clean attacks. Carter sees the sparkle first, sun flashing on a canopy where no friendly should be. He does not bank hard. He does not yank. He sets both throttles forward to the not yet red line, counts 2, and eases the nose so the horizon begins to slide down like a curtain. The Lightning answers the way training promised. Rate, not drama. Foggle keeps the sight on center mass and experiences the first sour note, closure not increasing as expected. At 25,000 feet, his engine simply does not breathe the way it did at 15,000. He can feel it in his feet and hear it in the pitch. The Lightning, conversely, behaves as though the air is still thick. Minute 2 is all about patience. Carter does not point directly at the threat. He aims for where the threat will be after finishing a calculated dive. His wingman's job is to keep the ladder clear. No surprise from above while the lead is busy. Foggle recognizes the climb for what it is and shifts to a shallow cut, trying to cross the Lightning's path and force a defensive turn. It's a good idea. It almost works. Then the twin tail keeps rising. Foggle realizes he's about to equalize altitude with the escort he intended to trap from above. He chooses discipline over pride and leaves a little speed in the bank for the exit. Minute 3, the first pass. Carter rolls level just enough to take a clean look, then dips the nose into a brief, measured dive. He doesn't chase, he meets. The nose battery in the Lightning does what nose batteries do when timing and distance are right, a short, tight burst that needs no convergence math. Fogel feels the snap of traces near the wingtip and responds immediately. No panic, just a sharp brake and a slide to the sunside where glare can be a partner. He does not linger. He extends away and down in a long diagonal, trying to pull the escort into a flat chase where weight and drag will punish the twin. Minute 4. Both pilots test their airplanes, not each other. Carter resists the chase. He pulls up, converts the tiny dive into altitude in hand, and takes stock. Gauges are green now that power is back in the steady zone. Manifold pressure is ready again if needed. The dive flap's lever sits where his hand can find it without looking. His wingman calls a second contact at 10 o'clock high, then, cleared. Fogel, meanwhile, keeps his exit as shallow as his nerve allows. He wants to rebuild altitude without admitting it to gravity. He feels that familiar softening in the controls that says his machine is now out of its favorite neighborhood. He tries a climbing turn to test whether the twin will follow it flat. It does not. Minute 5 is the pivot. The lightning duo decide to bracket. Carter holds the main climb. His wingman slices laterally to threaten a crossing angle if the interceptor commits to either of them. This is not showy. It is slow pressure. Fogel understands the trap. He chooses to do the one thing still on his terms: dive clean, extend far, and re-enter away from the escorts toward the bomber group's edge where a small gap has opened. It means trading the duel for the mission. It also means acknowledging that the last 2 minutes did not go to plan. Minute 6 closes the loop. Carter sees Fogel slide away, smart, disciplined, and refuses to be dragged. He climbs back to the bomber's high right and resets spacing. He has won nothing that will show up in a tally. What he has bought is time and shape, a defensive pass delayed, a formation kept coherent, a wingman who never had to risk a flat turn in thin air. Fogel reaches the outer edge, now lower than he wanted to be, and times a short, high-speed slash across a trailing box that costs the gunners a few seconds of aim and then is gone. It is the kind of pass that used to lead to a second and third opportunity. Today it leads to the measured climb of twin tails that were already waiting. After landing, the retellings diverge in tone and converge in content. In Carter's tent, the notes read like a maintenance card: power used as planned, temps controlled, one clean burst, no chase into the horizontal, bracketing worked, save the dive flaps setting for the next ride when speed piles up faster. In Fogel's room, the language is frank: entry good, initial geometry acceptable, closure lost sooner than expected, climb response of enemy aircraft abnormal at 25 to 28,000, do not accept vertical reattacks above that band without numeric edge. Neither pilot is dramatic about it. Both are professionals who make lists. But the lists add up the same way. The Lightning can meet a dive with a climb and not pay an altitude penalty. The Interceptor must budget energy differently in that air. One pilot leaves the day with a quiet sense that his toolbox fits the job. The other leaves with a reminder that some tools are now specialty items, to be used in particular corners of the sky rather than as the default. This is how 6 minutes become a doctrine tweak. In the days that follow, Carter emphasizes 3 points to new arrivals: don't squander vertical for spectacle, set your power 5 minutes before you need it, climb through problems, don't turn into them. Fogel emphasizes 3 of his own to his comrades: don't fight the twin where it breathes best, make lateral attacks near the edges, if you must engage escorts, force them to flatten first. The sky does not care which lecture is better written. It rewards the one aligned with physics and machines as they are, not as they were. By spring, the paperwork catches up to the flying. Reports from multiple units, friendly and opposing, start using the same practical phrases. Altitude parity gained by escorts, climb maintained at 26 to 30, compression managed with flaps. There's no poetry in those lines, but there is progress. And behind every line is a small change in how crews prepare. In Lightning ready rooms, instructors pass around a grease pencil diagram that looks like a staircase. On the vertical axis, altitude. On the horizontal, time. 2 lines climb the steps, one shallow, one steep. The shallow line represents the single-engine Interceptor's climb curve above 20,000 feet. The steep line is the twin with turbos set right. The lesson isn't boastful, it's procedural. If you spend too long flat between steps, you'll rejoin the other line where it is happiest. Keep your motion vertical enough that the steps belong to you. Maintenance adopts its own stair steps, checkpoints that keep the climb honest. Turbo wastegate calibration becomes a ritual. Boost controllers that hunt under cold loads are swapped before a mission day, not after. Oil viscosity is chosen for the temperature band aloft, not just the weather on the ramp. Crew chiefs hold short briefings with pilots about expected OAT at top of climb, a little dance of numbers that makes the first intercept feel inevitable rather than dramatic. Across the lines, defender squadrons build new wall charts. Old arrows that curved neatly from high sun to bomber noses now include caution hash marks. Escorts present at plus 3K, expect vertical meet. New tactics emphasize staggered attacks. First element makes a feint to pull escorts. Second element cuts laterally at the box edge. Third element uses the split attention to reach a bomber from below where fire is thinner. It is less elegant than the old plan and more survivable. Elegance is for peacetime lectures. Survivability keeps experience in the roster. There is another adaptation, quieter but just as real. Crews on both sides practice not taking shots that used to be automatic. A lightning leader calls hold, no flatten when a target seems gift-wrapped but would require burning altitude for a horizontal chase. A defender wingman checks his impulse to pull vertical after a fast pass when his altimeter says he's entering the band where the twin owns the climb. Restraint is not glamorous, but it preserves options. Options win long campaigns. In the background, engineers continue doing what engineers do when the front sends back useful noise. Lockheed drafts small changes to airflow around intercooler intakes to stabilize temperature margins on long climbs. A better heater shroud kit arrives for cold weather starts. Ammunition feeds get refinements so the nose guns never hiccup in high G pullouts. None of these updates earns a headline. All of them shave minutes off risk. And then there is mindset. The Lightning community begins to talk about continuity of escort as a measurable effect. It's not enough to arrive at the beginning and the end. The value lives in the middle, the portion of the mission that used to feel bare. Leaders design rotations so that one flight always floats a little higher and fresher near the deepest point. Relief flights plug in from behind as the early escorts peel for fuel. Tank drops are standardized to avoid the clumsy moments when a jet of fuel and a falling tank give an interceptor a perfect target. The choreography becomes tight enough that bomber crews can set their watches by when a pair of forked tails appears over the right wing in the most exposed 20 minutes. Opponents, for their part, lean into deception. A few units stage fake climbs to lure escorts upward, then break hard away to open a lateral seam for a colleague. Others accept that chasing escorts is now a poor trade and focus on bombers only, treating escorts as weather, something to be navigated rather than beaten. Over time, the best defender leaders become students of escort schedules, looking for the single soft minute in a 90-minute ballet. Some find it. Those are hard days. The next week, the schedule shifts, the soft minute moves, and the search begins again. Stories persist because they teach faster than memos. A bomber gunner tells about seeing a lightning form a white X with an attacker at the exact moment a pass would have cut the box in two. The attacker broke early and the formation stayed whole. A ground crew chief remembers a pilot who brought back a lightning on one engine, the good prop feathered and the hurt engine barely pulling, simply because keeping heat up in the damaged cylinders helped the oil stay mobile in thin air. It shouldn't have worked. It did, because the pilot had been taught to think in systems, not just stick and rudder. Training syllabi evolve accordingly. New pilots practice vertical patience, climb to a set altitude, hold power just below the red, stabilize temps, then make a small, precise reposition while keeping that energy in the bank. They practice early flaps, not as a crutch, but as timing. Deploy before cues stack up, not after. They learn the no thank you turn, a shallow refusal of an invitation into a flat fight, so often that it becomes reflex instead of a brave decision they hope to make under pressure. And they learn the quiet rejoin after a bracket. Never cross noses, climb on divergent lines and rebuild formation without advertising your path. If all this sounds methodical, it is. The mythic version of air combat leaves fingerprints on posters. The real version leaves fingerprints on checklists. The Lightning's gift is not that it makes heroes, it's that it makes good habits work at altitudes where bad habits used to be forgiven. The Interceptor's gift, for pilots like Fogel, is that it teaches clarity. He becomes expert at reading where an escort wants him to go and simply declines to go there. He trades fewer risky shots for more useful ones and returns to base more often with fuel in the tanks and lessons, not just stories. By the time spring turns to early summer, the numbers that matter have shifted quietly. Missions reach deeper with fewer formations shattered. Escorts report more intercepts denied by geometry rather than by luck. Defender units log more sorties where fuel, not damage, ends the day. Each side has adjusted to the other's best moves. Balance hasn't disappeared. It has moved upward, into thinner air, where the Lightning still breathes as if it was sea level. Ahead lie refinements, new variants, new opponents, whether that will challenge every SEAL and habit. But the core has settled: vertical control, disciplined energy, and a machine designed from first principles to do a specific hard thing very well. From that, confidence grows, not the loud kind, the kind that plans the next mission, marks the next target, and believes, with evidence, that the middle of the route will not feel empty anymore. The summer push begins with coastlines turning into runways. Once the beaches are secured, the map bends in favor of the escorts. Lightning groups hop from English fields to hastily rolled strips in France, trading long crossings for shorter sprints and denser sortie schedules. The shift changes everything. Fuel planning relaxes by precious minutes, top cover rotations knit tighter, and the window where formations used to feel alone shrinks to a sliver. Distance no longer protects airfields, but weather still does its best to keep everyone honest. Continental storms arrive in stacked layers, stratus below, scattered cumulus wedged in the middle, thin cirrus glaring above. The Lightning's instruments and training show their worth. Crews practice instrument climbs that feel like climbing through a bookshelf. Steady rate, fix to fix, emerge exactly where the brief said they would. The nose guns have no patience for guesswork, neither do the clouds. With bases closer to the front, new jobs crowd the schedule. Escort remains the spine, but counter-air at dawn and road interdiction at dusk fill the gaps. The Lightning's nose battery, compact, pointing straight, free of convergence worries, proves ideal for short, precise passes against aircraft shelter doors, parked airframes, and the rail yards that feed an army. Pilots relearn restraint in another form: one pass, one target set, exit at speed. Twin booms invite a second look from ground gunners. Lingering is a poor trade. There's a new presence overhead now: slender airframes with liquid-cooled engines and long legs, arriving in quantity. Far from rivalry, the tone becomes choreography. Lightnings own the vertical ladder in the mid to high band. The newcomers slide between altitude blocks and carry the escort line deeper still. Thunderbolts hang on the flanks like linebackers, sturdy, unbothered by flak bursts, ready to cash in bad luck with raw durability. On the radio, calls are crisp and almost musical. High cover set, middle relief anchored, low sweep clear. The enemy sees a single wall. Only the wall builders admire its seams. Adapting continues on both sides. Defender units pivot to time and place attacks, short notter scrambles aimed at a precise corner of a route. They start bringing heavier weapons into the mix for straight-in passes against bomber formations, accepting weight and drag penalties in exchange for a few seconds of overwhelming impact. Escorted formations adjust again. Spacing within the box flexes to reduce blind spots, and escorts take up oblique stations where high-angle entries can be answered without burning all their altitude at once. Cold finds the gaps in elegant machines. Autumn into winter brings the kind of chill that makes oil sluggish and metal sound different under knuckle tap. Lightning crews answer with routine rather than bravado. Cowl blankets on, preheat strictly timed, turbo linkages verified while the engine is still warm to the touch. Pilots, too, modify hands and habits. Glove liners become standard. Throttle movements slow half a beat to keep needle swings inside comfort windows. Where the summer allowed improvisation, winter rewards exactness. In this season, the Lightning's early dive flap lessons pay off. Compressibility no longer surprises anyone. It is just another cue to be managed. Pilots learn to treat the lever like a punctuation mark, inserted deliberately to shape a sentence, not jabbed in panic. The payoff is a new kind of vertical play: dive just enough to gather speed, deploy early enough to keep pitch responsive, pull through into a controlled zoom that wastes nothing and telegraphs less. Encounters with the new jets start as tales from someone else's sector, then become a shared reality. The first time a Lightning pilot watches a silver arrow cross a sky at a speed that looks almost wrong, the lesson sticks: do not chase lines that won't bend. Instead, the flight angles toward where speed must eventually become procedure: approach and recovery. There, altitude discipline and teamwork matter most. A jet's pure pace fades quickly when it must land. A pair of patient escorts can force a short, nervous pattern into an early, careful one. Not every attempt yields a result. Enough do to keep the pattern honest. Meanwhile, the intangible work continues, keeping crews steady under a tempo that never leaves calendar squares blank. Leaders' guards sleep like a precious commodity and rotate pilots so their mental batteries charge as reliably as their aircraft do. The informal school for new arrivals includes more than systems briefs and tactics diagrams. It covers how to eat when appetite is a rumor, how to shake off the cold that sneaks into your shoulders during a 2-hour escort, How to write the simplest possible debrief so maintenance can fix what matters without wading through adjectives. Across the lines, another kind of steadiness takes root. Defender veterans learn to value survival as a skill, not an accident. They become students of timing, slipping between escort brackets only when weather, fuel, and geometry all say yes. It looks cautious from far away. Up close, it is every bit as demanding as the wild dives of earlier years. A young pilot in that force learns to measure a good day not just by flashes seen but by returns logged. By winter's middle, the math keeps shifting. Losses on escorted missions drop into bands that planners once labeled optimistic. Defensive units are flying more, achieving less, and spending fuel trying to create one clean moment rather than 5 chaotic ones. The escort wall has not become impenetrable, it has become reliable. Reliability is the boring miracle of campaigns that end the right way. East and south, the same airframe writes a different set of notes. In the Mediterranean, the horizon is beige and blue, dust lives in every seam. Maintenance crews become artists with filters and seals, learning to keep grit from turning a turbo's precise heart into a scoured drum. The payback is reach. From island bases, lightning step across water to cover convoys, then roll inland to meet threats before they meet ships. Their speed makes them natural herders, spot an incoming group, push them wide, and buy a destroyer squadron 20 minutes and one more turning circle. Further inland, the lightning becomes a surveyor. In a camera-nose variant, guns give way to lenses and film canisters. The pilot's trigger finger trades bursts for exposures. These flights look gentle on a map and feel anything but in the air. The recipe is simple and unforgiving. Arrive at a precise minute, at a precise height, at a speed that makes interception a math problem rather than a contest. No one cheers when the engines spool down after a clean run. Everyone uses the results. Bridges that look ordinary from the ground reveal hidden reinforcements in the prints. Yards that seemed empty turn out to be full of spare rails and a single locomotive cleverly parked under a roofline. The next day's target list changes accordingly. On the far side of the continent, mountains make a different demand. Routes over high passes require aircraft that still breathe at 20 and 30,000 feet, and crews that can make decisions in air that feels like glass. Here, the Lightning's paired hearts and large wings are less about fighting and more about persistence. 2 engines mean a safety margin in air where the nearest suitable field is a ridge that will only look flat when you are already committed to land. Habit becomes a protective shell, fuel checked by minutes and gallons, oxygen systems tested 3 separate ways, descent planned before the summit is even a dark line ahead. In the wide ocean theater, the air feels young again. New kinds of engagements, different opponents, and a rhythm that has more to do with islands and shipping lanes than with grid squares on a continental map. Vertical plays still matter, so do early sighting and the discipline to attack only when the geometry is yours. The Lightning size and speed give it contradictions to manage. It is prominent, which means opponents notice it, and powerful, which means it can choose when to leave. Pilots learn to make the machine's silhouette part of the plan, arrive high, be seen, and let that shape create doubt at just the moment a coordinated strike needs quiet. Back in Europe, a winter vignette sums up the maturing doctrine. Dawn lifts grey off a forward field, and a 4-ship Lightning element launches into air that feels like it will crack if you breathe too hard. Their brief is an odd hybrid. Meet a returning bomber group at a checkpoint, then bend south to seam hunt for defenders trying to follow a different raid home. The element leader stacks his pair high and his wingman pair slightly low and wide, a mobile V with room for each to climb without crossing paths. 10 minutes early to the rendezvous, the element doesn't kill time, it invests it. The leader makes a shallow climb, not to gain a heroic number on the altimeter, but to put the sun where it will be a partner in 5 minutes. When the returning bombers arrive, the escorts slide into place like a spare sentence added to a paragraph that already read well. A single defender appears, tries a short feint, and breaks off when the high pair turn without losing a foot of hard-earned air. The rest of the ride feels uneventful, which is exactly the point. Then comes the seam hunt. The element bends south and finds what they were sent to find, a late pair angling home on a line that will just skim a defended field. There is a temptation to pounce, to make it a chase from behind. The leader refuses the easy story and chooses the effective one, a climbing offset that trades immediacy for inevitability. When the turn comes, it is with measured angles and short, calm calls. No one needs to raise a voice. Everyone knows where the next 40 seconds go. One brief pass, disciplined, vertical, done, and the element is climbing again, already backwards planning the exit in case someone else appears. On the ground after, The debrief is neither self-congratulatory nor grim. It reads like a cookbook that has been refined so many times the notes in the margins are down to a few words. Sun left to climb. Don't flatten for gift. Exit early. Oxygen good. Maintenance receives the only adjectives: a turbo that twitched when power rolled off quickly, a heater that didn't quite keep pace above 25. Those get fixed because they can be fixed. The rest, the choices, the timing, becomes practice for tomorrow. Across the front lines, the defenders' notebooks fill with their own refined shorthand. Escorts present early, vertical refusal from pair, late seam closed. The best among them do not complain, they adapt. They begin to think of escort presence not as a wall but as a fluid that fills gaps. To find success, they learn to think like water in reverse. Look for the cracks where it hasn't reached yet, exploit them quickly, and leave before the flow changes. Some days, it works. As spring approaches, those days grow rarer. The longer the campaign runs, the more the Lightning's reputation shifts from novelty to instrument. Its twin engines and distinctive tail stop being the headline and start being the expected tools for a particular job. Climb where others sift away, hold energy in an air that steals it, meet dives with climbs instead of fear, and, most important, be there in the middle stretch where formations used to feel alone. The pilots who fly it start to sound like instructors even when they are young. They speak in checklists and corner speeds and sun lines, and when they tell stories, the exciting parts are often about timing rather than sparks. If the aircraft has a personality, it's this: it rewards intent. It forgives less than some peers when mishandled, asks more of a pilot's brain and hands, and pays back that attention with options: vertical exits, steady climbs, second chances when a plan meets surprise. In theaters as different as alpine passes and island chains, that trait is the thread that ties them together. The forktail shape becomes shorthand among crews, not for invincibility, but for a kind of promise: if you bring the plan, the airplane will bring the rest. 2 blocks remain in this story, enough space to talk about what the aircraft changed beyond any single mission, how design choices echo into doctrine, how rival organizations learn from each other even while trying to outfly one another, and how a machine can teach a generation to think in 3 dimensions long after the runways are quiet. If you strip the paint and patches and look only at choices, the Lightning tells a story about designing for the problem you actually have, not the one tradition says you should solve. 2 engines weren't about extravagance. They were about altitude and reach. Concentrated nose weapons weren't about style. They were a precise answer to a geometry problem. Turbocharging wasn't a party trick. It was permission to fight where thin air erases other plans. Those decisions, taken together, created tactics that did not exist in the handbook. The handbook adjusted. Doctrine didn't change with a memo. It changed in briefings, in what instructors emphasized, in how formation leaders drew arrows on plexiglass. Vertical first stopped sounding like enthusiasm and became a baseline. Don't trade altitude for noise turned into a mantra. Even simple things: how to time a push over the top, how far to accept a nose-low exit before a gentle flap tap recovers feel, gave crews a vocabulary to share an invisible craft. You could hear the doctrine maturing on the radio. Fewer excited calls, more quiet vectors, altitude numbers spoken like coordinates that open doors. Across the front, the other side was learning too. The best opponents built their days around timing windows and energy traps, not just bravery. They learned to lure escorts down with feints aimed at boxes of bombers, then reverse as soon as a section overspent its altitude. They practiced operating from fields where a valley hit a first turn, where the sun made a short approach blind to watchers at 25,000 feet. Their leaders emphasized survival for the next mission, not final stands. That shift didn't make headlines, but it made their force last longer than raw math predicted. Meanwhile, engineers turned pilot anecdotes into metal. Field fixes for cold-soaked controls turned into production changes. Cable runs got subtle reroutes. A heater duct gained a baffle that warmed a stubborn quadrant first. Dive flaps that began as a safety valve became a precision tool with more reliable actuation and clearer cockpit cues. It wasn't just the Lightning. You could watch the whole escort ecosystem evolve. Thunderbolt teams learned to work the midband like a pressure door. The long-legged newcomers standardized an energy-efficient cruise that arrived with full pockets. Together, they shaped a sky where timing, not luck, decided most outcomes. On the ground, maintenance culture quietly underwrote every airborne claim. Twin engines and twin turbos demanded patience and systems thinking. Line chiefs started to sound like flight instructors. Don't sign this bird out until you can explain why you trust that linkage. Crews learned to read a tailpipe's color change as a weather report, to feel a bearing through a glove and call the hour when it would want attention. They kept small journals, temperatures, pressures, tiny noises, and those notes mapped to mission reliability better than any speech. When planners bragged that escorts could now meet formations earlier and stay later, they were really praising people with safety wire and grease under their nails. The change radiated outward. Bomb groups adjusted spacing because they could count on high cover to be on time. Strike planners added secondary targets to schedules because escorts could pivot and still make the bridge back over the sea. Recon flights pushed their luck a little less. They didn't have to. The cumulative effect was less dramatic than a headline and more powerful: confidence. Crews began to expect that if they held their plan, someone would be there in the middle stretch to keep the day on rails. None of it made the work easy. Weather still won rounds. A surprise layer could turn an elegant vertical trap into a blind man's bluff, and even the best hands occasionally reached for a switch and felt the stubborn, winter-stiff no of a linkage that had other ideas. But experience shifted what uncertainty meant. It shrank from a fog that swallowed missions to a manageable list of variables. You could plan around variables. You could build schedules that absorbed a missed turn point without unraveling. You could send a formation deep and know the escorts would be more than company. They would be options. As the calendar turned, range rings on maps became less like daring claims and more like routine. What had been beyond became just beyond, then simply on Tuesday. Bridges that had seemed untouchable were catalogued in stacks of photos with grease pencil arrows and dates. Airfields that used to launch unchallenged became places where approaches grew careful and departures later than planned. Logistics, the quiet heartbeat of any campaign, began to skip in predictable patterns. When rails are late 3 days out of 5, road convoys double back, and everything else starts to creak. That creak carries a sound: opportunity. The lightning story in those months is opportunity applied carefully. Its crews learned to create minutes where none existed a year earlier, to keep contact when the air thinned and turn a single altitude block into an entire set of choices. They were no longer proving a concept, they were applying it at scale. And the lesson baked into every sortie was larger than a single airframe. Invent a way to fight where the opponent cannot comfortably follow, then make it routine. Routine wins campaigns. By the last spring, the sound over forward fields changes. It is not louder, it is steadier. Launches stack at tidy intervals. Recovery windows slide without drama when weather nudges them. In the debrief tents, pilots talk more about timing than targets. On maps, arrows look less like heroics and more like plumbing, flows, pressures, relief valves. That is what dominance looks like up close, pros making complicated work seem ordinary. In that ordinariness lie the lasting lessons. The first is about design philosophy. The Lightning didn't try to be a perfect knife, it tried to be a perfect lever. 2 engines let it pry open altitude. Turbochargers let it keep pressure where others eased. A central battery of aligned weapons meant the lift of every second spent on the run-in went straight into results. Multiply that by thousands of sorties, and the advantage stops being flashy and becomes structural. Future programs took note. When engineers later tackled problems that seemed mutually exclusive, speed and reach, stealth and payload, they reached for the same mindset: meet the problem on its terms, accept complexity if it buys control, and surround complexity with human-friendly interfaces so crews can exploit it. The second lesson is about institutions. The Lightning succeeded not just because it could climb, it succeeded because an organization let it be what it was. Leaders tolerated training time that felt slow at first. Maintenance got the parts and the people to keep a complex machine simple at the point of use. Tactics officers were allowed to throw out old diagrams and draw new ones with altitude lines in bold. When a system this different enters a conservative craft like aviation, the danger isn't that it will fail, it's that it will be forced back into familiar shapes. Here, enough people protected its difference long enough for it to become normal. The third lesson is human. Machines expand possibility, people convert it into outcomes. Lightning crews developed a kind of calm that looks, from outside, like detachment and is actually focus. Trim set precisely, oxygen checked early, sun placed on purpose, the patient refusal to trade hard-won altitude just to be in it. That calm is contagious. Bombardiers breathe easier when the escort voice sounds like someone untying a knot instead of someone shouting. Recon pilots push the shutter button as planned when a high pairs contrails are already where they should be. The quiet competence of a few pilots under thin air can ripple down a target list thousands of people long. When the runways finally go quiet, myths try to take over. One says the lightning was flawless. The other says it was complicated and fussy. The truth is both less glamorous and more useful. It was demanding, yes. It made novices work hard and rewarded attention to detail. It had seasons when cold was an enemy and mechanics were heroes. And it was, in the hands of trained crews, the exact right lever for a set of problems that decided whether formations reached the heart of an industrial network and returned. You can love it for its twin booms and still remember that its greatest trick was making the middle of long missions feel guarded. Legacy spreads in lines that look nothing like a forked tail. Tactics textbooks kept the vertical habits and the energy math, just translated to new airframes and, eventually, to speeds where air behaves differently. Engineering shops kept the taste for bold architectures if the mission truly needed them. Even the culture carried forward, debriefs that focus on the next fix, not the last flourish, a bias for repeatable over dramatic, admiration for pilots who sound boring while doing extraordinary work. There is also a quieter inheritance, how rivals learn from each other. Pilots who once faced lightnings later taught young aviators in different uniforms to respect altitude as currency and timing as art. Engineers who once tried to counter the twin-turbo puzzle sketched new answers to new constraints. In the post-war years, when teams on both sides of former lines began shaping jets with ranges and ceilings that would have looked like science fiction in 1940, you could see the fingerprints of those lessons in airframes that made thin air their home and considered distance a solvable detail. For the public that meets the lightning only at airshows now, reflections shine most in sound and silhouette. Two synchronized engines rise like a chord. The twin booms draw a shape that little kids copy from memory after a single glance. Veterans stand a bit apart, watching the climb angle and the way the pilot rolls out of a dive with a touch of flap exactly when feel returns. They are looking for intent. When they see it, when the airplane is flown like a lever rather than a knife, they nod. Muscle memory recognizes philosophy. If you reduce the whole journey to a sentence fit for a plaque, it might be this: solve the right problem, then repeat the solution until it looks ordinary. The Lightning solved high altitude, long-range escort at a time when that seemed like wanting too much. It did so with choices that looked odd until they worked, then obvious once they did. And it kept working long enough that formation started to count not on luck but on procedures, not on heroics but on craft. The last reflection belongs to the crews who took those craft and made them routine. They'll say they were lucky, and perhaps they were, lucky to have a machine that gave second chances, lucky to work in teams where quiet professionalism outran noise. But luck is a poor explanation for a multi-year habit of being in the right place, at the right altitude, with enough energy left to decide. Better to call it what it was: preparation carried out so often that surprise found fewer places to hide. So when the lightning banks away in the modern sky and the sound fades, remember what the shape stood for in its own time. Not invincibility. Not flash. A promise: bring a plan into thin air, and this airframe will give you options. Climb when others sag, hold speed when others fade, cover the stretch where friends are tempted to feel alone. In wars of movement and reach, that promise is everything. And in the long memory of aviation, it remains a lesson worth flying by.